For many decades, to millions of television viewers, Alan Alda was almost synonymous with a single character, Hawkeye Pierce in the series MASH. With intelligence, humor, and a rare sense of humanity, Hawkeye was not only the center of the show, but also became a cultural symbol of American television throughout the 1970s and the early 1980s. When MASH ended in 1983 with one of the most watched finales in television history, Alan Alda had achieved something that very few television actors ever reach. He was not only the star of a famous series, but also a writer, a director, and someone who helped shape the very spirit of the program itself. In the eyes of the public, Alda seemed to have everything: fame, the respect of his peers, and a secure place in the history of American television. But what is interesting is that the story of Alan Alda did not stop there. After reaching the peak of his acting career, he gradually shifted his attention to a completely different field. Not bigger roles, and not an effort to prolong the glow of Hollywood fame. Instead, Alda began spending more and more time thinking about a simple but profound question. How can people truly understand one another? From television, he stepped into the world of science and education. He spoke with scientists, participated in discussions about how complex ideas could be communicated to the public, and eventually helped build programs that teach researchers how to communicate more clearly with society. So the story of Alan Alda is not simply the story of a famous actor. It is the journey of a man who has always been curious about other people. Someone who spent much of his life observing, listening, and trying to step into another person's point of view. And from that curiosity, his life gradually opened onto a path very different from the familiar image of a television star. Alan Alda was born in 1936 in New York, under the birth name Alfonso Joseph d'Abruzzo. From a very early age, his life was closely connected to the world of performance. Not as a star, but as a child growing up behind the stage. His father, Robert Alda, was a Broadway actor and singer who became well known during the 1940s. Because of his performing career, the family frequently traveled with theater tours across the United States. That lifestyle made Alda's childhood quite different from that of many other children. He constantly had to change schools. New cities and new classrooms came and went very quickly. But in return, much of his time passed in a very unusual world, the backstage of theaters. There, Alda watched actors preparing before stepping onto the stage. He saw how they rehearsed their lines, adjusted their emotions, and transformed themselves into different characters. For a child, it was almost like witnessing a strange transformation. Ordinary people becoming a living story in front of an audience. At the time, no one could have known that these quiet observations would later become an important foundation for his career. Because acting, at a certain level, always begins with a very simple ability: understanding the emotions of other people. Another experience from Alda's childhood also left a deep mark on him. When he was 7 years old, he contracted polio, a serious and frightening illness at that time. His parents tried a treatment method that was common in that era, which included extremely painful physical therapy exercises. The memories of that period remained very clear in Alda's mind even many years later. Not only the physical pain, but also the fragile feeling of the human body when facing illness. Perhaps it was from those experiences that Alda began to realize something early in life, something he would often mention in later conversations. To understand other people, sometimes you first have to feel what they are going through. And although he could not have known it then, those small lessons from theater backstage and the months spent struggling with illness quietly shaped an important part of the way Alan Alda would see the world. A perspective that always begins with curiosity about other people. After a childhood closely connected to the backstage of theaters, the path that would lead Alan Alda to acting seemed to have formed very early. However, before truly entering the profession, he still chose a fairly traditional academic path. Alda attended Fordham University in New York, where he majored in English. For Alda, studying literature was not only about examining language or the structure of stories. It helped him understand how people think and how emotions are expressed through words and actions. The stories, characters, and conflicts in literature gradually became an important part of how he viewed human nature. During his university years, Alda began participating more actively in the school's theater activities. These student productions were small, but they allowed him to test his abilities in front of a real audience. On those stages, Alda started to develop the acting style that audiences would later recognize very well: natural, flexible, and approachable, rather than the exaggerated dramatic expressions often seen in traditional stage performances. His years at Fordham also helped Alda realize that acting is not simply about delivering lines at the right moment. It is also the ability to observe people, the way they speak, the way they react when they are anxious, when they are happy, or when they try to hide their emotions. This curiosity made Alda increasingly interested in the small details of human behavior, something that would later become an important part of the characters he portrayed. After graduating from university, Alda served in the United States Army Reserve. Although his period of service was not very long, the experience still gave him a practical view of military life, of discipline, organizational structure, and the people who live within that environment. Many years later, when he played a military surgeon in a television series about war, these memories in some way helped him better understand the world in which his character lived. After completing his military service, Alda decided to pursue acting seriously. The early steps of his career were not easy. He began on the stage, where he continued to refine his performance skills in front of live audiences. Theater helped him learn the rhythm of acting, how to control his voice, and how to maintain concentration throughout an entire long performance. Alongside theater, Alda also began appearing on television, a medium that was developing very rapidly in the United States during the 1960s. He participated in many different programs, from television series to guest roles in individual episodes. This was the period when Alda gradually became familiar with acting in front of the camera, where every small gesture could be clearly captured. In addition, he also took part in several smaller film projects, although these roles did not yet leave a strong impression on audiences. Throughout the 1960s, Alda worked quite steadily in the entertainment industry. He was not an unfamiliar face on television, but he was not yet a star either. Most of his roles remained moderate, enough to sustain a career, but not yet enough to create a breakthrough. It was an important stage for many actors, the true years of learning the craft. Then Alda continued observing, continuing to learn from directors, from other actors, and from the audience itself. he was building step by step. And although no one knew it at the time, only a few years later a new role would appear on American television. A role that would not only change the career of Alan Alda, but also change the way television told stories about war and about human beings. The major turning point in the career of Alan Alda came in 1972, when he was cast as Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce in the television series MASH. The show was set during the Korean War, focusing on the lives of a U.S. Army mobile field hospital unit. However, when the series began airing in the early 1970s, the United States was going through a period of deep tension because of the Vietnam War. For that reason, although the story took place in a different war, MASH quickly became a way for American television to reflect the moral and psychological questions that society was facing at the time. In the world of the series, Hawkeye Pierce was a brilliant military surgeon who never hid his skepticism toward war. The character stood out for his sharp intelligence, subtle sarcasm, and a clear sense of humanity. Hawkeye often used humor to confront the harsh realities of the battlefield. But behind those jokes, there was always a deep awareness of the pain and the senselessness of war. The way Alan Alda portrayed the character turned Hawkeye into the emotional center of the entire series. He was not simply playing a talented doctor, but depicting a man constantly trying to preserve his sense of humanity in an environment filled with chaos. Over time, Alda's role in MASH gradually expanded. He was not only the lead actor, but also became deeply involved in the creative process of the show. Alda wrote scripts for many episodes, directed several episodes, and helped shape the narrative direction of the series. This made him one of the most important creative voices of the program during its later seasons. MASH eventually ran for 11 seasons, from 1972 to 1983, becoming one of the most successful and influential television series in the history of American television. The peak of this phenomenon came in February 1983, when the final episode of the series aired. That episode attracted more than 100 million viewers in the United States, becoming one of the most watched television events in history. For Alan Alda, MASH brought more than just fame. It transformed him from a familiar television actor into one of the iconic figures of American culture. But more importantly, the character of Hawkeye Pierce also reflected a part of Alda himself, a man who has always been concerned with questions about morality, humanity, and the way people treat one another in the most difficult circumstances. As MASH moved into its later seasons, the role of Alan Alda in the series was no longer limited to acting. Gradually, he became one of the most important creative voices of the program. Alda began to participate deeply in the writing process. Over the course of the series, he wrote more than 30 episodes, many of which focused more heavily on character psychology and the moral questions surrounding war. The episodes written by Alda often carried a quieter tone, paying closer attention to the emotions of the doctors and nurses who were forced to work in an environment filled with tension and loss. Alongside writing, Alda also began directing many episodes of MASH. This allowed him greater control over how the story was told, from the rhythm of the scenes to the way the characters interacted with one another. For Alda, this was not only a step forward in his career, but also an opportunity to explore additional dimensions of storytelling as an art. While MASH continued to succeed on television, Alda also began expanding his career into film. One notable project was the movie Same Time Next Year, 1978, adapted from the well-known Broadway play of the same name. In the film, Alda starred alongside Ellen Burstyn, and the story follows a relationship that lasts for decades between two people who meet only once each year. The film helped Alda demonstrate that he could take on more complex roles beyond television. In 1979, he appeared in the political film The Seduction of Joe Tynan, a special project because Alda not only played the lead role, but also wrote the screenplay. The film tells the story of an ambitious young senator who must face difficult choices between his political career and his personal life. Once again, Alda showed his interest in stories centered on ethics, responsibility, and the complexity of human character. By 1981, Alda took an even larger step when he wrote, directed, and starred in the film The Four Seasons. The movie follows three middle-aged couples who meet during each season of the year, and through these shared trips, the changes in their relationships gradually unfold. With a gentle tone and a keen observation of marriage and friendship, the film clearly reflected the storytelling style Alda was increasingly pursuing: a focus on people and the small details of emotional life. Alongside television and film, Alda also maintained his connection to Broadway, where he had spent much of his childhood. Returning to the stage helped him preserve his connection to live performance, an environment he always considered a fundamental foundation of acting. During this period, Alan Alda was not simply a famous television star. He was gradually becoming a complete storyteller, an actor, writer, and director deeply interested in how stories about human beings are told on screen and on stage. And when MASH came to an end in the early 1980s, Alda possessed not only fame, but also a wide range of creative experience. Yet what is notable is that after achieving all of that success, his interests began to shift toward an entirely different field. After MASH ended in 1983, Alan Alda continued to take part in many film, television, and stage projects. However, over time, his interests gradually began shifting in another direction, one less connected to Hollywood, but more reflective of his long-standing curiosity about how people communicate with one another. An important turning point in that process came in the early 1990s. From 1993 to 2005, Alda became the host of the science series Scientific American Frontiers on PBS. The program was designed with the goal of bringing new scientific research closer to the public. In each episode, Alda often visited laboratories, spoke directly with scientists, and explored research being conducted across many different fields, from medicine and technology to cognitive science. Rather than simply reading narration in front of the camera, Alda frequently asked questions, observed experiments, and tried to understand how researchers explained their own work. During this process, Alda began to notice a fairly common problem. Many scientists could explain their work very clearly to colleagues within the same field, but when speaking to the general public, those ideas often became difficult to understand or distant. Not because science lacked value, but because the way it was communicated sometimes failed to truly connect with the listener. For Alda, this was particularly fascinating. As an actor and storyteller, He was accustomed to finding ways to help audiences understand and feel complex ideas through simple language and human emotion. While observing conversations between scientists and the public, Alda began to wonder whether skills from acting, such as listening, empathy, and natural response, could help improve the way science is communicated. From those questions, Alda's interest in communication grew deeper and deeper. Gradually, it was no longer just a topic within a television program. It became a new direction in his life, an effort to understand how people can communicate with one another more clearly, even when discussing the most complex ideas. The experiences from the program's Scientific American Frontiers gradually led Alan Alda to believe that the problem did not lie in science itself, but in the way science was communicated. Many important discoveries existed within laboratories, yet remained difficult for the public to access because of the gap in communication. That idea eventually led to a concrete step. In 2009, Alan Alda, together with colleagues at Stony Brook University in New York, she helped establish the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. The goal of the center was quite clear: to help scientists learn how to communicate their ideas more clearly, naturally, and understandably to the public. What made this center different was its training approach. Instead of focusing only on traditional presentation techniques, Alda's program incorporated many elements from the art of acting. Scientists who participated in the program were often asked to perform exercises that felt quite unexpected. They took part in improvisation exercises, improv, practiced reacting quickly in unprepared communication situations, and learned how to truly listen to the person in front of them. At first, these exercises could feel unfamiliar to many researchers. But according to Alda, the goal was not to turn scientists into actors. What mattered more was helping them realize that effective communication does not come only from explaining information accurately, but also from the ability to connect with the person who is listening. Alda's core idea was quite simple. Before trying to convey an idea, the speaker needs to understand what the other person is thinking, what they are feeling, and how they are trying to understand the issue. In other words, good communication does not begin with words. It begins with understanding. Through this center, thousands of scientists, doctors, and researchers have participated in training programs. And for Alan Alda, this became one of the most important projects of his later life, an effort that combined art, science, and his lifelong curiosity about how human beings can understand one another better. After many decades of activity in the fields of art, education, and science communication, the life of Alan Alda entered a new phase when he received an important diagnosis. In 2015, Alda was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological disorder that affects movement. However, he did not immediately make this information public. For the first few years, Alda continued working and monitoring his health quietly. In 2018, he decided to share the diagnosis publicly during a television interview. What caught the attention of many people was not only the news about his illness, but also the way Alda spoke about it. He maintained a rather calm attitude. Alda explained that he had received the diagnosis several years earlier, and since then had continued to work, write books, and maintain his normal daily activities. Instead of seeing Parkinson's as something that would end his projects, he viewed it as a new part of life that he would need to learn to adapt to. In recent years, Alda has continued to maintain a considerable workload. He has kept writing books, many of which revolve around the themes of communication and human connection. He also began hosting a podcast titled Clear Plus Vivid. In this podcast, Alda speaks with scientists, psychologists, artists, and people from many different fields. The conversations often revolve around a topic that has long been familiar to him: how human beings can understand one another more clearly in an increasingly complex world. Even while facing Parkinson's disease, Alda continues to approach life in the way he always has, by observing, asking questions, and trying to understand human experiences. For him, this is not only a challenge related to health, it is also a new chapter in his long journey, a journey that continues to revolve around curiosity about how people live, communicate, and confront the changes that life brings. When Alan Alda is mentioned, many viewers immediately remember the image of Hawkeye Pierce in the series MASH. Throughout the 11 seasons that aired from 1972 to 1983, Alda appeared in more than 250 episodes, becoming the central face of one of the most influential series in the history of American television. The final episode of MASH, broadcast in 1983, she's attracted more than 100 million viewers in the United States, a number rarely seen in television history, and still remembered as one of the largest television events ever recorded. But Alda's legacy does not end with that role. During his time working on MASH, he wrote more than 30 episodes and directed several others, becoming one of the individuals who helped shape the content and tone of the series. This made Alda not only a leading actor, but also an important storyteller behind the camera. After MASH ended, Alda's career continued to expand into many other fields. From 1993 to 2005, he hosted the science program Scientific American Frontiers on PBS for more than a decade, conducting hundreds of interviews with scientists and introducing many complex research topics to television audiences. In 2009, he helped establish the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University. Since then, the center has trained thousands of scientists, doctors, and researchers in communication skills with the public, using methods that combine science with elements of acting. In addition, Alda is also the author of several books, including best-selling works such as If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face?, a book that explores communication and empathy in human life. If one looks at these numbers, more than 50 years in the arts, hundreds of television episodes, dozens of written scripts, and thousands of people trained through science communication programs, it becomes clear that Alda's career stretches across many different fields. Yet whether on stage, on television, in film, or in conversation about science, he seems to return again and again to the same question: how can human beings truly understand one another? It was that question that carried him from the backstage of Broadway in his childhood, to one of the most famous television series in America, and later into laboratories and university classrooms. So when looking back at that entire journey, Alan Alda is not simply a famous actor. He may also be remembered as a lifelong storyteller, someone who has always tried to use stories, conversations, and curiosity to help people understand each other just a little more clearly. The story of Alan Alda often begins with a role, A military surgeon in MASH, intelligent, humorous, and always trying to preserve a bit of humanity in the chaos of war. For more than a decade, Hawkeye Pierce became one of the most familiar characters on American television. But if we look beyond that role, the life of Alan Alda follows a path quite different from the familiar image of a Hollywood star. After achieving the kind of fame that many actors can only dream of, he gradually shifted his attention toward a simpler question, but also a deeper one. How can human beings understand each other better? From stage and television, Alda moved into conversations with scientists. From performing roles on screen, he began speaking more about communication, listening, and empathy. Perhaps that is why the legacy of Alan Alda does not exist only in the films or characters he portrayed. It lies in something else, a lasting curiosity about human beings, and a belief that understanding between us is always worth pursuing. And perhaps that is also why his story continues to be remembered, even many years after the final episode of MASH aired. If you are interested in the stories behind cultural icons, the people who have experienced fame, challenges, and the changes of time, continue following Icons and Legacies. Because sometimes, the most interesting part is not the moment of fame, but what happens afterward.